Good afternoon, dear friends and family members. On behalf of Tamim Sahli's family, I wanted to welcome you. Welcome you all to a special memorial that is meant to commemorate and celebrate the life of a man we all loved, of a very special and unique individual. A person whose loss was devastating to many of us. And while we continue to mourn his loss, let's take today as an opportunity to celebrate his life. Celebrate the life of a person who is larger than life itself. We will have friends, family members, and colleagues speak today to help us relive some of the many wonderful memories of my father, Tamim. But also, some of you may learn a few new things about him today. So let's take the opportunity. My brother Ziad is going to be speaking very shortly, followed by eulogies from myself, Don, Anne, Joe, and Dumit. And we're very grateful that you guys have agreed to come here and speak. And thank you for being part of today's very special memorial. And with that, I'm going to have you enjoy the food. And my brother Hassan is going to also be broadcast from South Africa, by the way. Just you'll see a short conversation. It won't be live, it'll be a video, but he is in South Africa thinking about us right now. So please enjoy the food, and more to come shortly. Thank you.
So I just want to say a few words. First, address everyone, family and friends. I want to thank you all for coming today to celebrate my father's life and legacy. Some of you traveled a long distance to pay your respects, and I know my dad would have loved to see you all together right now. I spent a lot of time thinking of what to say today. Some of you knew my father as a friend, a family member, or a colleague. Today I want to talk about my father's wonderful life story and speak about Tamim the father. For those who don't know, my father's short childhood was spent in a small village in Palestine called Balad al-Sheikh, named after his ancestors. In 1948, at the start of the Israeli-Palestinian war, my father's family fled their home to Lebanon and stayed with relatives in a small apartment in Beirut. He would tell me that they moved into their underprivileged cousin's house and set up mattresses in their living room to sleep. This was because at the time, their wealthier family members had shunned them due to their sudden misfortune. My father received his high school diploma, and at the age of 18, he moved away from his family to Saudi Arabia to work at Aramco. He would send money back home to support his family in Lebanon, and in the early 1960s, he returned to Lebanon and rose in the rank in the Lebanese banking sector. In the 1980s, my father once again found himself wanting to travel to escape the Lebanese Civil War. He moved to the US and excelled as a businessman. His life timeline shows his self-made success story in the face of many obstacles. But what it doesn't recount is how he was as a father. I can tell you a lot of things about my father that you may already know. He was a person of principle and discipline, a shrewd, self-made businessman with a savant-like ability to process numbers, a philanthropist who helped others and did so without ever revealing it. He was a man who firmly believed in higher education, something he did not have the privilege to attain himself. He would constantly remind me, العلم يرفع بيوتا لا عماد لها والجهل يهدم بيوت العز والكرم, which translates to education raises the buildings which have no foundation, and ignorance destroys the most noble of homes. One of his many, many sayings. And to support and continue this legacy, we've established the Tamim and Lamis Sahli Endowment Fund at the American University of Beirut to support 2 Lebanese and Palestinian students per year in their pursuit of higher education. It's hard for me to express the depth of his dedication to me as a father. As we all may know, he had a hard exterior, but that exterior was thin. Underneath, he was a soft, caring, and dedicated father. In 2001, My mother and I moved to Lebanon so that I would immerse myself in the language and culture. My father stayed in the US to continue managing, at the time, his company InSource Solutions. He would visit us every 2 to 3 months, and during one of his visits, my dad wanted to have my sleeping schedule changed so that I could sleep earlier. As a kid, I was frustrated with this change. I looked at him and said, "Why do I have to do this? Just because you're here now?" I think those 2 sentences had a profound effect on him, because within a short period of time, he had sold InSource and moved back to Lebanon to become a full-time father. Family was his top priority. He would always reinforce the idea that I had 5 brothers and sisters, and that he had 6 children: Hazem, Malak, Maryam, Hassan, Jawad, and me. He would tell me repeatedly during the last 5 years of his life that he wanted to see my child during his lifetime. And I'm thankful he got to see his granddaughter, Lamis, which you may have heard during this afternoon, in the final years of his life. My father has been an inspiration to succeed and become a dedicated father to Lamis. It was his powerful presence that inspired me to work to my greatest potential to achieve my aspirations. I feel heartbroken to no longer have him here with us. Thank you again to everyone who could make it today. It brings our family great joy to see that my father continues to bring us together, even after his passing. His memory will forever carry on. Thank you. And now my brother Jawad is going to say a few words.
Good afternoon. My name is Jawad Sabah, for those who I have not had the pleasure of meeting. And in 1988, I was Lamis' son and Tamim's stepson. But then the stepfather I had in 1988 became the father that I never really had. And I stand proud to call Tamim my father and feel eternally grateful for the many memories and lessons that remain ingrained in me and frankly in my children who are listening in the back. Now let me state that it's not common in the Arab world for a stepfather to embrace, love, sponsor, and adopt his wife's kids who come from a different marriage. But that wasn't Tamim Sahli. He was a progressive man who thought very differently. And this is why myself, my older brother Hassan, and Maryam, all stepchildren, call him our father. And he had our backs when nobody else did. Now, my relationship with my father surely didn't start out that way, meaning it wasn't rosy from the beginning. In fact, I had to earn his trust over time. And it wasn't words that won you over with Tamim Sahli. It was deeds, it was actions, it was output. And the relationship grew much stronger when he started seeing the output of his hard work on me in the man I became and as I started progressing in my career professionally. But he always made it very clear that I was on probation every single day at work. And I should not be complacent. And I'm very replaceable. And I should aim higher. Now, someone else listening to this would have said, hey, cut the kid some slack and give him some kudos. But that wasn't the Tamim Sahli way or the Tamim Sahli school. It was a school of excellence, of a continuous improvement mindset, day in and day out. Now, speaking of school, there were a couple of lessons that I want to share with you, 4 of the many lessons that I had from the Tamim Sahli School of Life. Let's start with lesson 1. Lesson 1, family. Now, he defined family as those people that lived under the same roof as you did. Be loyal to them and care for them and do what's best for them. He also made it very clear to my brothers, Hassan and Ziad and Hazim, that we need to be united. And he made sure that whenever there's an important decision that involves us, we would sit down and coalesce and have a consensus-driven decision making. He cared a lot about that. And I must admit, I have been on the receiving end of several phone calls from my father Tamim when he was having an argument, or two with Ziad, or three, or an argument with Hazim. And I was proud to serve as a peaceful broker on many of these occasions. Lesson 2, which should not be surprising to many of you: finances. He would always say, Jawad, be frugal, don't be cheap. Don't be cheap. Because if you're cheap with money, you're going to be cheap with love, with affection, with everything else. So strike the right balance. A funny memory that comes to mind is when I was an 11-year-old in Richmond, Virginia, and I needed to blow my nose. I went to the tissue box, and I pulled 4 tissues at the same time. Now, he was super annoyed with me, and he said, you take 1 tissue, you divide it in half, you keep half in your pocket, and use the other half. Now, I must admit, as an 11-year-old, I was super annoyed. But who would have thought I'd be doing the same things to my children today when I'd say, turn the lights off, don't pull 5 napkins or tissues at the same time, and don't mess up the walls. Yes, I do that. And I think my kids are super annoyed today, but they will get it one day. You know, he believed in giving back. He really believed in giving back, and you just heard the story of the endowment. And he did it discreetly, without anyone knowing, or he didn't want anybody to really know. He funded my education, my healthcare, and everything else to help me, stand on a solid ground. And he did that not because he had to. He did that because he wanted to. Lesson 3 is humility. His guiding principle is simple. Be as nice to the janitor as you are to the CEO. That was his motto. Again, I must admit, this is not necessarily an Arab world view or an Arab world mentality. But again, he was different. He was unique. He was special. Superficial things didn't matter to him. Didn't faze him. In fact, I remember him giving me a hard time about why I wanted to fly business class. And he would say, look, you're going to arrive at the same time as the economy or coach passengers. Why should you pay the same, different amount? Now, it was hard to convince him that there's a real reason for why you should do that, but he didn't buy it. He was very comfortable wearing a Seiko over a Rolex or a Patek Philippe. But for the record, he did fly business class. He just was giving me a hard time, like he always did. And the last of many, many lessons from my father, is ambition. And this is probably the lesson or the value that has had the most profound effect on me and my siblings. Keep aiming higher, is what he used to say. Don't sit on your laurels and be complacent. Aim higher and aim higher. And he would always be very proud and very happy when we would send him, emails from work, promotion letters, acceptances to grad school. And he wanted us to just keep breaking the barrier and going one notch up. And anytime I used to go to him and complain about a long day or a long week at work, he'd say in Arabic, which translates, work vitalizes the body. Now that is debatable, I would say, on some days, but that was my father to me. He really believed in hard work and perseverance. I'm thankful to have been given the opportunity to share these life experiences and reflections about my father to me with all of you today. I can't think of a bigger, a more important role model or a more positive influence in my life than him. And I know he's probably looking down at us and smiling and very happy to see us all coalesce together. May his soul rest in peace. And I thank you all very, very much, and God bless him, God bless you. And I'm going to turn it over now to Don for his portion.
But I will clarify a couple of things. One is, to me, never argue. You discuss vigorously, but you never. There we go. As I said, to me, never argued. He would explain to you why you were wrong, and we discuss things. Secondly, quick story comes to mind, and I said, one is that he would be looking down, he would be smiling, and then he would frown and say, "How much did you pay for this today?" When I was working for him, I'd been working for a month or two, and he walked into my office, and he reached down on the floor, and he picked up a paper clip, and he laid it on my desk and said, "Write yourself a reprimand for wasting company assets." I said, "What have I gotten myself into?" My name is Don Dillard. My wife, Carrie. We're honored to be told we were considered part of the Sahli family, which of course includes all of the family. First, I could talk for hours, so when I've gone too long, just give me the sign. And how many phrases and how many sayings and how many things that were stories from Tamim, just like you guys pointed out. My father passed away when I was 10, and after him I had two strong men influence my life. In college, I was on the rowing team, and my coach pushed us to our limits and then beyond, whatever I could have thought I could have done. He taught me that when everyone else quit, I could keep going. And then 37 years ago, in April of 1984, I went to work for Tamim Sahli. I credit him as the greatest influence in my life. He's responsible for making me into the man I am today. I cannot begin to tell you what Tamim and his family has meant to me and my family over the years we knew the man. I remember one day at work, Tamim told me he was going back to Beirut and would not return until he found a wife. We can all see what an outstanding job he did for his beautiful wife, Lamise. We remember the day he told us Lamise was pregnant and the day that Ziad was born. We also remember when he lost Malik, Zain, Ataf, and now his son Hazem. We were honored to be invited to attend Ziad and Marianne's marriage ceremony and the magnificent reception in Beirut. And we're honored today to be invited here to share our love for Tamim. I remember Tamim telling the story of how he had a friend drove a Volkswagen Beetle from Beirut to Saudi Arabia because they had heard this company called Aramco was starting to dig oil wells out there. As Ziad said, he had graduated from high school, but he told them that he was an accountant. Tamim was hired and his friend was not. So when he left Beirut during the Civil War, Tamim had been the general manager and chief operating officer of one of the largest banks in the Middle East. Not a bad career from an accountant in the desert. But he wasn't finished. He started a new career in the United States when he purchased a copier company with his brother Muhammad. Now, if you know Tamim, as these gentlemen have mentioned, you can guess that working for him was not like anyone I'd ever worked for. First, you could not jump right in and start talking business. He taught me that in the Middle East, you would sit together. And you're thinking, what does this mean? Well, you would sit, you would talk, you would chat. And then you would gradually come around to what it was, and I'm thinking, well, I've got to get back to my desk and work. But now, to say that Tamim Sahli was a tough taskmaster would be one of the greatest understatements of all time. He pushed and pushed relentlessly. I've got Aaron and Ann that know what I'm talking about. It seemed like I would never live up to his standards. I could get 49 things right, and all he would do is jump on the one thing that I did wrong. Did I mention I cussed Tamim Sahli? Of course, it was in my mind or behind his back. I called him my tormentor. I would work 2 or 3 12-hour days to get monthly financial statements prepared, and he would always find things I could not answer. He always told me, and I would complain, and he always told me, I pay you to do the right things. I get paid to tell you what you did wrong. Did I mention I cussed Tamim Sahli? But I quickly learned one thing, that one of the most important things about working for Tamim was he could smell a lie a mile away. You never tried to pull something over on Tamim. If I told him I didn't know the answer, but I'd find out, he would accept that. But you'd better get the answer pretty quickly. If someone tried to lie or bluff their way with him, he would attack. One day after working all weekend on the financials, I finally blew up on all those questions, and I shouted, I quit. I went to my office, I grabbed my briefcase and a painting off the wall and stormed out of the door. You can imagine my wife's reaction when she got home. The next afternoon, I got a phone call. This was before caller ID, and when I answered, it was Tamim. He asked, why was I not at work today? He said, you need to come to work tomorrow. I went to the next day, and I don't recall that we ever spoke about it again. After that, I was determined to be able to answer every question he could ask. He would ask me if the financials were ready, and I would tell him no, it would take another day. I would use that day to study the financials to try and anticipate anything he could possibly ask. In reflecting, he never challenged me really whether he knew that the financials weren't ready or not. And one day that magical moment came when I answered every one of his questions. And all he said was, okay, thank you. The next time he asked me fewer questions until we reached a point where he would say, how did they look? And I would give him the list of all the highlights. A couple of years later, he said to me one day, Don, you remember all those questions that I used to ask you about the financials? He said, half the questions I already knew the answer, and the other half I didn't care what the answer was. I just wanted to see how you reacted. At first I didn't know how to react. But that was when things began to change between Tamim and me. I realized he was no longer my tormentor, but my mentor. He would include me in meetings and would respond to people, well, I don't know, you'll have to ask Dunn. I knew this allowed him to watch everyone and see their reactions and responses. Tamim was also hard of hearing, and he played that to the fullest. Often he would look like he was not following. In private, I would call him dumb like a fox. He said, never be afraid to let people think you don't know what things are and ask questions to make them prove they do know and what they're talking about. Of course, looking dumb was always easy for me, but I've used that tactic throughout the rest of my career. I never could tell the exact date that we became closest of friends. Tamim was successful in business and he rewarded loyalty. I learned so much from him as he bought and sold a number of companies. But with his last one, he made sure that Ann Kroom, Aaron Evans, and Tom Barzak and I would be able to purchase it and prove ourselves worthy. As I said in the beginning, I could go on and on. And let me say, Tamim was like a porcupine. He was tough and prickly on the outside, but he was soft, caring, and generous on the inside. It took a lot to earn his trust, but if you did, he was fiercely loyal. Tamim Sahli was a great man. The impact he had on me and my family will never be forgotten. Thank you.
We're going to play a video from my brother Hassan, who's in South Africa and couldn't join us, but he wanted to share a few words about our father Tamim.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us as we celebrate the life of a remarkable man, Tamim Sahli. My dad is a man that lived by strong principles and led by example, and always wanted to make sure that we live our lives in an ethical, honest way, to be hardworking, to push ourselves to achieve more than we think we can achieve, and has instilled the principle of ethics and honesty and integrity in everything that we do. And I hope, on behalf of my family, that we will continue to lead in his way, even when he has left us. When I think about the conversations we've had, endless, about everything, the lessons he tried to teach me, and the love he showed us. He was not only a father, but a friend, a confidant, a person that you knew, regardless of what your issue is, he will be there to support, he will be there to help you through it, and you can always count on him. Aim high was his favorite phrase, and I'm proud of you, equally favorite. We will never forget him, we will always celebrate him, and we will always be thankful that our lives were touched by him. And I hope, as he looks down on us, that he'll always be proud, and he will know that we're still leading in his way, and leading by his example, and leading by the lessons he taught us. Thank you very much, and God bless him. Allah yarhamak am, Habibi am.
Before we move to the next speaker, let me just say I'd be remiss if I didn't say how touching your speech was done. Thank you. You are family. We love you and look forward to staying in touch with your family throughout the many years to go. Now, I'd love to invite up Ann Kroom, who is also a very special friend and former colleague of my father, to give a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. They said my name is Ann Kroom. I'm very honored to be here today to celebrate the most extraordinary life of Tamim Sahli. You're going to hear some themes here that if you weren't already aware, there's some repeats. And I'll let the others, as you've heard today, tell you about his early years, as you've already heard. Dunn has known him for a very long time, well before he became an extraordinarily successful Richmond businessman, and knows those stories better than I. But I met Tamim when I went to work for Harman Commonwealth. I was 30 in July of 1991, and Tamim had purchased Harman Commonwealth in the previous year. I then followed in his footsteps when he spun out InSource Solutions, a new company from Harmon Commonwealth, in 1997. And as it turned out, he would be my last boss. I just turned 60 this month, so that was a 30-year professional relationship that grew over time into a friendship. So I'd love to share just a few memories. The Tamim Sahli I knew was traditional and fearless at the very same time. In many ways, from my vantage point, I saw Tamim as a very traditional Middle Eastern businessman in a traditional marriage with a family that he absolutely adored. Lamise was the ideal wife and homemaker and mother. So in 1991, when Tamim appointed me president of InSource, it was not exactly a time when selecting a woman would be unheard of, but in our very male-dominated industrial automation industry, it certainly would not have been the norm. In many ways, it was a very brave decision. Yet he had confidence in me when it was not expected. I had to earn it, of course, but that's something you don't easily forget. So a life lesson to ignore what others think. Make your own way in the world, lifted by your convictions and your priorities. The Tamim Sahli I knew was thoughtful in word and deed, as we've heard many times today. He was often a man of very few but powerful words that stuck with you. As you heard from Dunn, normally more questions than answers, as you would expect in a real coach and leader. It was an embarrassing long time for me before I recognized the pattern that Dunn just spoke of. He asked great questions, and for the longest time, I would embark on a much too long, undoubtedly boring, explanation of my answer. But eventually I realized he wasn't listening, possibly because my answer was indeed boring and incomprehensible, but more likely because he was just making sure I had an answer. What that answer was mattered a lot less to him. So a life lesson from a real mentor that to coach is a leader's ultimate job. The Tamim Sahli I knew was thrifty and generous. I live in Baltimore, so when I came to Richmond to meet with Tamim, I was a visitor in our Richmond headquarters. I would often use temporarily an office very near his, and I guiltily enjoyed the days when the bankers, I hope they're not here today, when the bankers came to meet with he and Dunn. Because it didn't matter whether the markets were up 2,000 points or the markets were down 10,000 points, he was not satisfied with their performance. How dare they lose his money? And one by one, they would try to explain. I could guiltily sit there going, that's not going to work. Because it did not matter. But they always left, perhaps cussing under their breath about that chief SOB, but working harder than ever on his behalf. And yet that same man, as you heard, took the generous leap to sell his company to myself and Dunn and Aaron and Tom. He got a fair price, but he undoubtedly could have gotten more if he'd driven the hard bargain that he pushed his bankers for. So to us, he was generous in his sharing of success. So a life lesson to pay it forward. The Tamim Sahli I knew was tough and strict, as you have all spoken, on the outside, but incredibly sentimental and gentle underneath. As Tamim aged, I saw him soften around the edges. He laughed more, and he became a friend to me, not just a boss and mentor. I don't think Lamise would have necessarily approved because she had him on a very healthy diet, but almost every time I came to town in the latter years, he would come in, probably about 9:30, and say, where are we going for lunch? And we became our habit to go to, I don't even remember the name of it at the time, but it was the Taza kitchen near the office now. It was French at the time. And we would have mussels and a bottle of red wine. And we would have marvelous conversations about the world and religions and politics and, well, just life. And always there was talk of family, his and mine. And on that note, I'd love to close with a final favorite personal memory, if you'll indulge me. At some point, Tamim and others from InSource came to my house in Baltimore for drinks or dinner. My kids were small enough that they had to be instructed on how to behave, like that ever worked. And my eldest son, Parker, my only son, but my oldest, Parker, was my fearless one. So I would guess that Parker was 5 or 6, and after a few seconds of behaving in pleasantries in our foyer, he blurted out to Tamim, "I bet I'm stronger than you are. Do you want to wrestle?" And before his embarrassed mom could redirect the conversation, Tamim was down on the rug, in his suit, wrestling with Parker. It made quite the impression on Parker as well as Tamim. So when Parker graduated from high school in 2013 at age 18, Tamim, always thoughtful, sent a check. And I kept a copy of Parker's thank you note that he sent to Tamim. "Dear Tamim, how are you, wrestling buddy? It's been a long time. I've grown a little since our last meeting too. Sounds like it's time for a rematch. Anyway, I'm writing to thank you for this universal gift and say that it will significantly help me in my next chapter in my life." So as you can see, he invested in many others, his family, of course, but his extended family as well. So a life lesson to never forget the power and importance of family, the family you create and the family you choose. You never know whose life you will forever touch. So rest in peace, my good friend, part of my chosen family, and teacher of life lessons. You are missed but not forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I'd like to invite Dr. Joe Haddad to the stage to give a few words.
Hello everyone, my name is Joe Haddad. I'm a friend of Tamim. And as in most friendships, it started with a casual introduction from a mutual friend in Lebanon. And then over time, we started chatting and visiting and discussing different things. And it turned into many things between us were things that we related to and understood the same way. And that's how our friendship developed over many years. One of the things that is very characteristic of him that I think that he was first he was a man of substantial means, but he was very humble. And anytime we talked about finances and money and how much success he had in one deal or the other, his answer was, "It's just money in the bank. It's not changing my life. I'm still wearing the same kind of suits. I'm not buying a bigger car. I can't eat more. I can't travel anymore. So it doesn't make much difference." But what I always thought is that that money in the bank was not just for him to spend. He was freely and generously giving some of this money with his pleasure to let friends and family, and close family goes without saying. But he was also very generous with this money to strangers. I knew about the students at the American University in Beirut whose college education has been completely underwritten by him, and I understand that's continuing through the fund. So that's one thing about him. Another thing about him, that he was very sharp of mind. I had a very dear aunt in Lebanon, and I was her financial caretaker. And of course, Tamim, who would go to Lebanon much more often than me, would take care of her. He used to spend a very large amount of his time just volunteering, taking care of her, helping her with transactions and things that I asked him to do for her. And then when he'd come back to Richmond to visit, we'd get together and he would tell me, account number such and such and such. He would spell out the account number. Has so much in it, and there's this stock and that stock, which today is valued at so many dollars. Dividend was paid for this one, and this one, other one is going to get dividend in 2 months. And I'll tell him, Tamim, my God, how do you remember all that stuff? I mean, I stopped playing cards with my friends because I'm incapable of counting till 13. And here you are spitting those numbers like this. How do you do it? He said, I try, and I'm never sure whether he tried to do a mental exercise or whether he just was a natural for him. But I appreciate him talking about, you know about the numbers. Yeah, he was, he also was, another interesting thing about him that he was like in the know. He knew what things were going on, what was going on. If you mention somebody's name, he'll tell you which village his family comes from, how they made their money, how they made their fortune, how did they get ruined. What big social thing happened that he just knew who was who. And I thought that was interesting. Another thing about him is that something that all of you have already said tonight, is he's a very loving person. He was loving not to his immediate family, of course, which you always think is a given. but he was even loving a situation of conflict. I'm familiar with certain conflicts that he had with his older children, important issues to him. And he confided me in them because we were close enough by then that I knew what the stories were. And sometimes the conflicts did not get resolved, but he was always available financially with his time for his counsel to be available to them. And I admired that in him because it was like a challenge to his personality to not put up with something that was not his way. Another thing about him I can think of is his honesty and his honesty of expression. He would not flatter somebody. He would not express admiration in someone or a cause or a political thing or a social issue or a financial issue, except out of conviction. It was never based on race or religion or ethnic origin. It was always based on merit, that if he told you, I agree or disagree with this, he gave you a reason for it. And I guess our friendship is based on the fact that we shared many of these values. He was also honest in the strict sense of the word, like what we all think of honesty. One time he told me, to be honest, actually it's good for your health, because you don't have to worry about being prosecuted, you sleep better. And the world gets around that you're honest, so you get more business, you get more customers, you make more money. So it's a win-win. There's no reason to be dishonest. It just doesn't pay. And, so he just lived like this, and I admired that. He was also a very meticulous and perfectionist kind of person. Maybe a repetition on some of what my previous speakers said tonight. He was, years ago, he was in the process of having a house built. And him and I were on the buildings, at the building site, and we noticed a small dent in an air conduit, which is, of course, hidden inside the wall. So he told the builder who was there at the time, he told him the specs on the house say air conduit. They don't say a dented air conduit. So he made him change the air conduit. And when we were chatting about this afterwards, he said, well, I don't care about a dent in the air conduit, of course. I just want them to know that next time they're going to take a shortcut on something more important, they know it's going to cost them more money. But he wasn't only a perfectionist and strict on others, he was also strict on himself. At one point, he had dietary restrictions. And I've never met anyone who's more compliant to medical instructions than him. We would sometimes be sitting together, and I'm eating something which is not on his okay list. And I would tell him, Tamim, tastes good, looks perfect. Just have a bite, it's delicious. It's not going to do you any harm. And he would say, I know it's delicious, I love this. But if I have a bite, I'm going to want a second bite. And if I have the second bite, I'm going to feel bad about it. If I don't have the second bite, I'm going to feel bad about it. So it's easier for me not to, from the beginning, do it, and I'll get over it. So all these things together and small trivia in our friendship over the years strengthens our friendship. And sometimes I think that maybe I should not miss that friendship, because it will always be part of my life. I will always reminisce about it. So like it will always be here. But Tamim will not be here. And that I will miss.
And so, thank you, Joe. I was hoping you'd give us a little bit of some bachelor stories together, but maybe for some other time, because I know there are several. I'd love to invite up Dr. Doumit Bouhaidar to give a few words, and then we'll wrap it up.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Doumit, and I usually don't like to speak in this type of event, but Tamim was such a good friend, and I don't want to miss the opportunity of talking about our 23 years of knowing each other. So our first encounter was to tell you about he's a punctual guy with everything that he does, very punctual. And the first encounter would have been our last encounter. Because one night, I mean, we knew him for, 1 or 2 days, and he said, come to our country club, I have a country club, and we can come and like around 7, come meet us over there, you and your wife. I said like, yeah, that's fine. So in my mind, I don't know how in the world I thought that he owns the country club and he's there all night, and so he's like, from 5 till like 11 or whatever. So I told Claudia, and it's like, you know what? I mean, why? I mean, we had something to do with the kids at that time, and we were in no rush, and we took our sweet time to get there. So we were there 45 minutes later than what he intended. And when we walked in to the country club, we found out that he was standing for 45 minutes in the rain, waiting for us to come in, and then invited us. So that our first encounter would have been our last if it wasn't for like he's a true friend. He's a true friend, basically. The second thing I want to talk about, he never bragged. So in one of the evenings, we were like talking. It was before the dot-com bubble, so all the stock market was going crazy. So, and I was new. I was a medical student at that time, or finishing my fellowship. So I was starting to invest in the stock market at that time. So we were talking. It's like, yeah, and I bought like maybe 15 AOL. Oh yeah, that's good. I mean, you bought 15. I bought 10. I couldn't want to commit more than 10. And then we bought Lucent Technology, and I would say, well, I bought 50. And he said, no, I think I bought 70, I think, of Lucent Technology. 2 years later, I found out that he was talking about 50,000 US. I was talking about 50 Lucent Technology stocks. So it's like all this conversation, and the guy was like looking at me. It's like, man, he's like very wealthy, and I was like in my 50, and he was talking about the 50,000, 200,000 stock. So, but he never bragged. I mean, really, that tells about his character. He's never bragged about his finances, and he lived as a humble person. And then he was very, very loyal to his friends. So he never missed an opportunity, whether even when he moved to Lebanon, he insisted that despite our busy schedule, when we moved over there, despite his busy schedule himself, he insisted that every year we will just have to meet together and take time together as friends. And he would invite us over for dinner every time we visited Lebanon, and that was on a yearly basis. And every time he came here, we made sure that we come and be together. So he's a very loyal friend, and I mean, it was the saddest day when we were sitting actually at our home when he was telling me about his pain, and that's when I realized there is something wrong going on, and unfortunately from that point on it was a decline in his health. But I love Tamim and wish him like God bless his soul, and rest in peace, Tamim. We miss you.
Thank you, Dumit, and thank you to all the speakers. You could hear a lot of themes converging here. And there's obviously a lot of students in the Tamim Sahli School of Life, but there's one student that we forgot about. That student is my mom, Lamis Sahli. So big round of applause to my mother. First of all, thank you for marrying him. Because if you didn't marry him, I wouldn't be standing right there. So, and thank you for, making him a softer person and a better person than he was already. And speaking of soft and sweet, I'd like to invite you to the dessert. And thank you so much, everybody.